Sarah Lee and Amanda and Renee. They're great to work with, and we're just so happy to be bringing this event to you all. My name is Pam Miner. I work with Paul at Hudson Valley Center for Innovation, and we're happy to have Danny here with us today to join in this conversation. We're just getting this web series off the ground. But with a quick introduction on Hudson Valley Center for Innovation, we are a nonprofit. We're led by entrepreneurs and for entrepreneurs. So we're bringing our personal experience, our business expertise, and our networks to help you and hundreds of other small businesses who are at any number of stages in their business to grow and to prosper in their spaces. So we're happy to have you here. I'll just give you a quick background about myself, and then I'll shoot it over to Paul and to Danny. I started my career 1,000 years ago, helping small businesses actually sell their products and start their businesses in the overseas market. I've owned my own business for the last 20 years. I joined Hudson Valley Center for Innovation in 2020, and since then we've helped literally hundreds of small businesses through their challenges, and we're happy to bring some of that experience and expertise to all of you here and over the next couple weeks. So let me shoot it over to Paul.
Yeah, thanks for the intro, Pam. And yeah, so I'm an entrepreneur. As Pam mentioned, we all are. I got my start actually in banking and then moved over to the nonprofit lending side. And we're actually going to have a guest on later in the series that'll talk all about lending, and they're also from a nonprofit, so I know their world pretty well. But I quickly got into the world of startups. Tried to start my own fintech app. In that process, I actually ended up starting kind of like a startup studio with 4 other partners. And so we were helping businesses go from 0 to 1 with anything from branding, software development, financial modeling, UX, UI work. And in that process, I met one of our founders that we were working with, who was starting like a trucking technology company. And I joined up with him. We raised some money, grew the business for 3 years, and then I left in 2021 and have basically just been consulting and advising small businesses and early stage startups since then. I focus a lot on the finance side and on operations. Danny, you want to give a little history of yourself?
Yeah, thank you for the time today. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm currently the visiting lecturer of entrepreneurship at the SUNY New Paltz School of Business in New Paltz, New York. I also advise and have clients focus on growth systems and growth strategy. I do that with a couple business partners. It's mainly startup founders or companies that are launching and finding the first of everything. First clients, first checks, first teammates to bring on, or more advanced, later stage growing companies. It could be small businesses or Main Street as well, really just focused on what the next path to growth is. I think we'll probably cover a ton of that today. Previously, I ran a nonprofit 501c3 as managing director, focused on education and training of entrepreneurs and professionals. And prior to that, I spent many years working as head of growth or head of initiatives for startup companies as an entrepreneur. So I care a ton nowadays about education. I think in many ways that's its own path to growth. So I'm always trying to advocate for that as well.
Good call.
Great. Thanks, Danny. Okay, so before we get into the meat of this, I just wanted to share a couple of quick items. As I mentioned earlier, we are recording this session, so you'll be able to look back at it later. No need to take notes or whatever. And also, this is intended to be interactive. We'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to ask questions. You can put your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand, and we're glad to answer any questions you might have. So just as a quick introduction to what we'll be talking about today, what we wanted to do is sort of lay some fundamentals and some basic information so that we can build off of that. And what we're hoping is that through this series, you as business owners can identify sort of where you fit in the mix, where you consider yourself now, and where you're hoping that your businesses are going to grow to going forward. So we'll, as I said, we'll start with some fundamentals. We'll bring in some expertise from our experiences and from our work with other businesses, and then we'll go deeper into, you know, planning, you know, executing and what have you. So I'll hand it back off to Paul, and we'll go from here. Any questions so far? Everybody good?
Yes.
Yeah, and one thing also to note is that this will be a 4-part series, so 3 more episodes after this, where we'll go even deeper on each of the what we're calling engines for growth. So today we're basically going to outline what those different engines are, and then talk about the importance of the growth plans that you can achieve some growth depending on which engine that fits your business. But basically, to get started, we thought we would outline some fundamentals. Myself, Danny especially, we're big on fundamentals, so it might seem repetitive or things that you've heard before, but we do just kind of want to lay the stage or set the stage so that we can build upon it. And so what we'd like to start with are the 3 types of businesses. So if you think about what type of business you are today, as we're talking through this, try to figure out which category you would fall into, because it will help inform you which growth paths are available to you. So the first type of business that we have identified is independent operator or contractor. So this is usually somebody providing like a one-to-one service. You could be a plumber, you could be an accountant, but somebody that's doing like a one-to-one service with their clients. They don't generally have a team around them. They're just an independent operator or contractor. The second is a lifestyle business. So this is generally the type of business that most of us fall into. You know, this is your Main Street retail businesses, your restaurants, Maria. It could be an accounting firm. So maybe you've built up a small team around you. It's no longer just you as independent contractor, but now you're, you know, there's somebody else there. So we also define this again as usually more than one person. And then the last type of business that we think about is a high growth company. So this is generally the ones that you hear about in the news that are getting funding from venture capital or private equity. They're really not like a business you can relate to. They're meant to have money pumped into them and to grow very quickly. They're generally all over the country. They're not just regionally, and they've got hundreds to thousands of employees. So again, as we're talking through this, you know, some of you might be independent contractors. Some of you might have lifestyle businesses. Some of you might have lifestyle businesses that you're aspiring to grow into a high growth type of company. But depending on what category you think you fall into, that will then dictate which type of growth path that you're able to take. So I'm going to open this up to Danny as well, and just get your general thoughts, Danny, on these 3 types of businesses and what they mean for growth going forward.
Great. Yeah, I think what we're trying to do here is at least identify a broad set of types of businesses. You know, that there's many individuals who are working, you know, really as a sole or a single proprietor, you know, and have contracts. So I think, Paul, you captured that well. You know, just a quick note on the lifestyle businesses. This is where it starts to get a little bit mixed. You know, it could be, for example, a family-owned business as well, you know, as a form of Main Street. But I think relatively, it's the revenue from the business is affording you the lifestyle that you need to operate, you know, your business and in your life as well. And then on the high growth, I always think about it as, and this sort of kind of a metaphor, like a AAA, like A plus, A plus, A plus, you know, type of business, that the expectations are, you know, hyper growth in the shortest amount of time with the most outsized return, you know, for partners that are involved in that business. And, you know, I do think, at least over the years, I've thought more and more there. Not that I'm being rigid, but there's somewhat kind of like preferences and personalities kind of associated at times. And for the record, you know, I think that doesn't need to be stagnant, or the status can change over time. You know, if you're 40 years old, you know, like kind of like myself, you might come into one versus the other. You might have run a lifestyle business and say, now I really want to go high growth, or vice versa. on that. The only other fourth that we could potentially add here is a nonprofit organization, where engines to growth are still connected to these fundamentals. So I would always return it back to, the growth fundamentals, that in these types of businesses, there's always going to be a team, whether that's yourself or yourself and other people. Managing even 5 people, 10 people, or 100 still requires, man, an awful lot of good work to make that happen. There always needs to be a baseline of revenue, and how you're gaining traction with whoever your clients are and partners. There always needs to be some form of system or components to how you're operating this business. So there's a lot of work that goes into any type of business. But I do think, Paul, to your point, that there are many fundamentals or foundations that must drive growth, no matter what type. And I don't mean to be reductionist, but, because every business faces their own challenges. But if you're not understanding the simplicity of your business model, then it actually is much harder to grow over time. I would call that the Starbucks cup of coffee. They do sell mugs, but that's a tertiary product. Everyone walks into Starbucks assuming they're going to buy coffee. So that's what I mean by simplicity as a foundation of any type of business that we're discussing today. So,
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think that the reason we even outlined them in this order of independent contractor, lifestyle, high growth is because you can, in some ways, almost graduate from one to the next. Sometimes businesses do just start with the one person and then it graduates into a lifestyle business. Maybe at some point a lifestyle business, achieves some really good product market fit. So, whatever product they're selling, the entire market is really wanting to buy it. And then you can go out and raise some money and turn it into a high growth company. So there are ways to graduate from one to the next, but there are ways just to say, hey, I'm an independent contractor. I'd like to double, the sales that I'm doing next year, or I am a lifestyle business and I want to triple the sales by opening a new location next year. So I think with that said, we'll get into what basically the meat of this entire series is, and that is the engines for growth. So I'm going to outline all 4 that we've identified. Danny and I will go into them in a little more depth, and then over the series, we're really going to zoom in and focus on each one as we go along. So the 4 that we've identified are.
Sorry, Paul.
What's that?
Paul, any questions so far? Because we are, talking about a lot of different stuff. Herman put a question in about the S Corp versus the LLC. Did you guys want to take a quick cut at that?
Yeah,
I'm not sure for your other businesses, other people on the call, whether you're considering what business type you should have in order to run your business. So Danny, maybe just a brief word on that.
Yeah, I think with the caveat, I don't have a JD. I haven't operated any legal or firm, but just, as an advisor of many companies, there are certain rules based on certain types of businesses, Herman. So for example, I'll start sort of backwards. If you want to be a high growth, rapid growth company, that's more of a venture that's going to be backed by, for example, high amounts of fundraising, then even if you are an LLC registered business, those investors are going to require to be a corporation. And that's where there's strategies for that legal advice. For example, what often comes up is to be a Delaware Corp in certain ways because of the modeling of venture capital. But that doesn't mean to say that that would be the best or restrictive in some ways. There are other ways to make that happen. Other than that, whether you're a sole proprietor and also, paying taxes on your own Social Security number, you could do that too. I mean, you could start there as an independent contractor. Many independent contractors do that. To be an LLC really becomes a matter of the operating agreement with your partners, if they are involved or not. And do we want to divvy up the 100% of that business? That's really where advice from a lawyer would come handy, based on being an LLC versus a corporation, even if you are a lifestyle business, Main Street business, family owned, a franchise, etc., for those types of activities. But even if you are paying on your own Social Security and number and you are a sole proprietor, that can easily be done as well. So I hope I gave some general light on that. And I don't know, Paul, if you have anything else to add there.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally it's all related to taxes and then how you are wanting to distribute money or distribute profit from the business. Like Danny said in the beginning, this is definitely something to talk to either a lawyer about or a tax accountant. But it really just depends on your plan for how you're going to distribute profits from the business. Yeah, an LLC, if you're forming it with other members and you want to keep all the money in the business, you may do it one way. If you're an LLC and maybe you want to convert into an S corp because you're distributing a lot of money at the end of the year, you may do it another way. But it really just depends on your intentions with how you're going to distribute money to yourself and your partners, and then the tax implications for that. There's no like right answer. I don't think. It really just depends on your situation. Okay, so moving into the engines for growth. So number one, we've identified is self-funding. So this comes from a number of ways we'll get into in a second, but that's your bootstrap model. The second would be increased sales and customer growth. So that's you not taking on any outside capital. Maybe you've already funded your growth yourself for a while, and now you're just saying, I'm going to go out and increase my sales and grow my customer base as fast and as much as I possibly can. The third option would be debt financing. So going out and getting a loan to fund your growth. And then the fourth would be equity investment, which again is a lot of times reserved for the high growth type of company, but it can also be reserved for the lifestyle business as well. So that being said, Danny, let's get into self-funding. So when I say self-funding, what comes to your mind on trying to get a company either off the ground or just to grow it?
I like to be very operational, tactical, right, pragmatic this way too. So I try to always align the paths, since you brought it up that way, with what the user or end user or partner looks like, right? So the first thing I think about with self-funding is my own equity or my own asset, if that makes sense. So I'll go through two examples.
Or when you say your own equity and your own asset, what's important there?
Yeah, so I'll go through, just two or three concrete things. So if I if I own a vehicle, then I have my own equity where I could, for example, sell that vehicle, make some money. Let's say it's $2,000, and still put that $2,000 into the business. So I am self-funding that on my own. So I think the broader question is where
converting your own assets.
So where do I have asset liquidity, to bring to the table myself and sort of like bootstraps, right? This is where sort of this, phrasing came from, that if I had to bootstrap my own company, then, some people go to, do I want to say extreme? Not really, because like if I'm an obsessed, founder and entrepreneur, I'm probably going to figure out ways to do this. But, have I borrowed against my own 401k? Is that the best thing that I've done in my life? Probably not. But at the time I needed that money. Maybe someone could even argue with me whether I needed it or not, but it's been a success because I did it. So I had my own asset per se, or liquidity in that sense. The other thing that I always think about self-funding is myself, right? Call me Catholic here, I guess. I'm trying to be more universal. Is, my family member or my friends, my very close friends, like my best man at my wedding, or my neighbor who for years has been the godfather of one of our children, and say, I'd love $5,000 for these reasons, and here's what's up. So I think that form of self and who I'm connected to, and maybe they have some asset or liquidity, are always the things to make happen. One last comment here, and I don't think this is kind of super creative, but I think of notes, and I'm being very legal or technical here from a financial perspective. Let's say my father has a savings plan. There could be a note to me for $10,000 that I still owe it back, but that's some form of liquidity or asset. So let's say I need 10,000 to do X, but I agree, almost like a bank agreement, to start paying that back in month 2 or month 3 for X period. That's a form of self-funding, in my opinion. And the point is to strategize who to do it with or when to do it, and how to make it happen for obviously a return and growth, in the long run. So
I think generally speaking, in this category of self-funding, you are evaluating what options you have like available closest to you. And you do raise, so again, that could be selling a car, liquidating some sort of asset you have. Potentially, there's a program called ROBS. I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's where you can tap into or borrow against your 401k.
Yep.
You're looking at the various ways you can achieve some sort of liquidity to put into your business. But you also raise a good point that you can't, in this category, I think you can also consider turning to maybe your closest, so your friends and family. I think there's an argument to be made that falls under either the debt or the equity financing piece that we'll talk about in a second. But I do think that when you're talking to your friends and family, this is not a bank, it's not a professional investor. It does sort of fall under that self-funding where you're having to, be the entrepreneur and become way more creative in how you're raising those funds from people that are closest to you. I think this category, this self-funding category, is probably the one where things can get the hairiest and where there's the most gray, but it's also the area where you can get the most creative and extract some money or raise some money in some way that does get your dream off the ground or allows you to start funding the growth of your company to provide your solution or your product to more people.
Yeah. I mean, with most of the businesses that we deal with, pretty much everybody is getting their business off the ground with some form of self-funding. People on the call today, show of hands, or have most of you started with self-funding? Yeah. Right?
Yeah. I think there's two things, and this sort of covers the breadth, Paul, of the paths that you're talking about with, with the debt financing and equity investment and other things, even including self-funding. The reason is because there's limited or illiquid cash on hand. Like even owning a house nowadays is tough because, I mean, it's a good thing because the price has gone up and there's been upside. But then even if you sell, you'd have to buy at current market rates, and redeploy that money. So what I'm saying is the human behavior side of that is most people might say, well, it's actually kind of right now an illiquid asset. I can't really get the cash or as much as I need from that. So let me refinance, et cetera, so on and so forth. But so I think my general question is, or insight is, because we need cash on hand, for growth, then where do I have asset or liquidity that I can tap into to make that happen? And that could be as small as $1,000 return on a car, or as large as whatever that greatest asset is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it. And for session 2 next week, we're going to have a really great entrepreneur on who's going to tell her story of getting her business off the ground. There's a lot of self-funding involved in that. So let's move into increased sales and customer growth. I mean, this is where the entrepreneur really shines, and I think where people sink or swim. I mean, this is really the way that most companies grow. It's just a matter of, to go get more customers, do you need to raise money? Do you need to take out a loan? Do you need to tap into your own savings? But I think this is where any wise person would say, focus here. Focus on increasing your own sales to fund your own growth. So Danny, when we talk about customer growth and increased sales, what comes to mind?
Yeah, and the number one is right with revenue, you have to have quality service to customers. So, customer revenue in a way, right? That's what, just bringing that to the table. In my opinion, Paul, I'm not arguing with the way that you're introducing these. It's just I would put revenue first, number one, even ahead of self-funding. It's the number one top of mind, must always be happening, mindset and path and strategy, etc. It's always revenue, first. And that's what grows, right? That is, in some ways, having that cash is not only rewarding, knowing that you're providing a service, product, or a program to the market that's buying it, confirming it. But, the more that you have, the greater good you can do in the market, hiring people and expanding. Since you went through some, sort of tactical ways, right? Do you need more money to hire people? Do you need more money to get more, more sales and marketing? I think many business owners too, at least Main Street, also think about a new location. So if I could just walk through, there's a couple assumptions here based on sales and revenue. And that is you're going from, number one would be you're going from zero to whatever that first revenue point is. And I think one of the important things to identify is that path not only requires the customer engagement, but education of that customer as well. That's why new revenue is so hard, because you have to educate the market, the customer, on what you're doing at the same time that you're trying to generate sales. And so the marketing campaigns in a way have to be almost like educational campaigns. The hardest thing to do in the sales quadrants, there's four quadrants. The hardest one.
You've explained those to me in the past. Why don't you tell everybody?
Yeah, so I'll start with the fourth because I'm just making the point now, is that to sell something brand new to someone who is brand new, right? That doesn't know.
A new offering to a customer who is not your customer yet.
To a new customer is the hardest thing to do. As we walk up those quadrants, it's I'm not saying everything's easy, right? But it's easier to sell an existing product to an existing client. Like, for example, a renewal. If I have a 1 year on something, are you going to renew? That's pretty clear. I got value, I didn't get value. So as we trickle away from that, right, is there an existing product to a new customer, or is there a existing customer to a new product? It's like, then there's different calculus there on how to do that. The other assumption on revenue is that you are a small business, Main Street, family owned, franchise, etc., and you're kind of making okay money, and you're making, let's call that $500,000 a year. You could even be a nonprofit. Do you continue to want that moving forward? You might have grants, you might have contracts that are valued at 500, and there's a certain point of like, okay, do I just maintain this? If I'm running this diner, for example, or this restaurant, or do I want to find a way to get to $1 million? That's where the calculus becomes, a little complicated or messy. They call that the messy middle. You're in the middle of this business. You're not a new business anymore. You're not fully established. Do I open a new location? Boy, that's a lot of real estate cost and overhead. How do I get more people in my door? Sometimes that's really challenging to make it happen. But I think revenue and figuring that out is really, really important. And cash on hand is the most important thing nowadays in a business. And just to end with a stat, this is probably about a year old now, but coming out of the pandemic, and Rockland IDA might even have more info on this, but cash on hand with Main Street businesses, for example, was estimated to be about 14 to 18 days, of runway there. So you need to figure out that next revenue set.
Meaning the business could only go on for 14 to 18 days with the cash they have on hand.
Yeah, and I've worked in education a lot. I'm not critiquing the whole industry. I'm just saying, like, for example, enrollment on a year-to-year dated, year-to-day basis is dropping, right? That's 80% of that type of education business as revenue. So what do we do with new enrollments? If we're Jody, for example, or Montessori, running a Montessori program, how do we find new people walking in the door? And I can't even think about a new location. So it's just, these are the real challenges with revenue, but it has to be the number one strategy.
Mhm.
And Paul, I'm a little bullish on that, obviously, right? But I think it needs to be the top of mind strategy for path to growth.
Yeah, good points there. And I think one thing that's embedded within revenue that sometimes people don't think about, or embedded within increasing their own sales to fund their own growth, is that your margins need to be healthy. And by that, I mean, you need to be charging a lot more than it costs you to charge, to sell that product. So if you're selling a product for $10 and it costs you $5 to make, is there a way that you can increase the price to 12 and then cut down the cost, to $4 to make? And now your margin's a lot bigger than it was before. So sometimes it's not only that you need to increase the amount of customers you're selling to or the amount of people coming into the restaurant, but it's, can we cut costs a bit, or can we increase sales, or can we do both together? Because by doing that, then you're able to obviously generate more cash and put it back into the business to fund that growth, whether that means more marketing, more advertising, hiring a salesperson, opening a new location. Once you have the cash, you have a lot more options and flexibility. Okay, let's move into the.
I'll just give one quick thing. And the messy middle, I know from my business, I feel like I'm in the messy middle always. I don't, I've started, I'm doing what my business is going along, but how do I make it grow? And I feel like, where do you guys, the rest of you stand? Who feels like they're in the messy middle? Is anybody else feeling like they're in the messy middle? So most people so sort of starting up or messy middle. So, and just a quick anecdote about, how to grow that revenue. I think Paul's point about margins is really important, because we have a manufacturer's rep business. We decided we were going to take on more employees and grow our business through added sale through those employees. And then it turned out that it really, like, the amount of hassle of adding those employees and all the costs that went with it, there just wasn't enough margin at the end of the day, to add those people. So we added them, we took on, additional customers, but it wasn't our best path to growth, because there just wasn't enough margin in it. We weren't making enough for how much work it was, to have all these extra people. It was just too much. So we cut back, and we cut back so that we went back to one employee, and we took a different path for growth, because that one just wasn't revenue generating enough for us. So just an example, it doesn't have to necessarily kill the business, but it didn't really help us with the growth that we were looking for. So I'm just saying, trying things, starting things, it's really important to look at those margins closely when you're making additions, or you're doing a hire, or whatever it is. And if you make a mistake, there's chances to sort of pivot. So just wanted to add that for a little bit of examples.
Yeah, and we'll get into some of this with the growth plan, but I think you bring up a good point, Pam, and it makes me think about the concept of just putting together a quick financial model or financial projections so that you can understand, okay, if I do this thing, what is that going to look like over the next 6 months? And sometimes, you can just pull out an Excel sheet or a calculator, just do this on your own. Sometimes you might want to hire somebody to help you think through those numbers, but it does help tremendously if you do say, okay, if I raise prices by $1 and I'm able to cut costs by $2, and I'm able to, or I'm going to hire this one person who I think will bring in 50,000 in sales next year. What does that actually look like after a year? Am I doing better than I'm doing today, or am I actually underwater because I really spent too much money on hiring this person? So the concept of just putting together some sort of pro forma or financial projections really does help. Herman, you've got a question?
Yes. Yeah, everything you're saying is, boy, is hitting home. It's almost like you're talking about me. But in any event, the messy middle, I like that term. I think I'm in there right now. I've been a one-man band for 8 years on as a weekend warrior. I always had a full-time job during the week, and I've always had my little HVAC business of installation and service on the weekends for many years, and I've done okay. Um, Now I just retired from my full-time job, so now I'm have plenty of time thinking to pivot. I guess that's the right term, and advance. I've always had liability insurance, like $1 million. So I'm in people's home, installing equipment, but I needed that. But now I'm to the point where I just purchased workman's comp, disability, and for myself, so that I can, pull permits in certain towns that require those.
Mhm.
And any event, it's a few dollars that I've, like I said, I have been funded. Now I'm to the point where I'm realizing big time we're no longer, I'm an older fellow. We're no longer in the penny saver, or the newspaper advertising world. It's all digital now.
Mm.
So, that being said, I realize that, and I have just partnered with a digital marketing company. And for the next 6 months, I'll have a web page, a domain, and that's my messy middle right now. I am in territory that's, I don't want to say unfamiliar, but unaccustomed to this point. I'm very familiar, with things. I've been around the block a long time. So I'm thinking I'm on the right path. I put that little text up there, LLC or S corp, because I'm meeting with an attorney this afternoon, and that's one of my questions. How do I protect my assets that I've built up my whole life, which is my home that you're looking at right now, and but yet venture into a new realm of growing and doing my heating and air conditioning installations for homes. And God forbid I get into a problem, but I mean, I've been doing it so long, knock on wood, all my installations are top shelf, top notch. But in any event, that's what I'll be promoting with the website and pictures and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the messy middle, boy, that's a good. I like it.
So I think, and this sort of touches upon some debt financing as well, that we could even, Paul, if you're okay, we could move into that too.
Yeah.
As well. So I think the one question that I always ask myself, I've asked it over years, whether, I was an entrepreneur, I was running a nonprofit, or I'm even just advising clients, is I always say to myself, there are a lot of things that matter as a business owner, but what matters most? And, that to me assumes time, space, and money kind of, triangle there, right? That I would have to figure out. So what matters most? So I think the needs statement on this, or the desire, is returning to this simplicity. What matters most is service, quality service to customers, clients, users, whatever language you're sort of using there. But I think that there's a real growth question on, if I can only take it so far, right, for what matters most, then what are my other options? So with debt financing, if there's equipment involved, if there's sales, human resources, right, sales capital to that, or marketing, that are going to support these paths to growth that Paul's introducing, then that's a good justification. The issue, and I'm speaking freely on this, I'm not speaking for the banks, I'm speaking based on my experience, is that the underwriting process has become a little harder with debt financing. So for example, if I'm making $100,000, then I might get 10%, on that 100,000. And what is 10,000 going to really do for my business, for my matters most, right? So now I think it's an issue of how can I operate and generate revenue or some self-funding. It's usually a combo of those two things together in order to then be positioned for debt financing, right? So what happened in the pandemic with the rising interest rates, and I'm broad stroking a little bit here, but if we're talking about engines of growth, the restriction has been that some folks are holding their money closer, right? Including banks I've seen, right, with debt financing, definitely venture capitalists. They had the least amount of money deployed, last year, 2023, over the course of about a 20-year span, give or take. And how do I continue to operate there? So how do I position myself for debt financing to get 50K or 100K in the business? These lines of credit and these financing deals were sort of galore back in the day, several years ago. But now it's based on operating cash, and clients and revenue. That's what they would call traction. And I'm half laughing about it because it's just so hard to do that combination. Generate revenue, find some liquid assets that you have to put those together, and then pair it with debt financing. So, Paul, I don't know what else you would want to say about banks or partners in this, but these are the paths that everyone needs to think through.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're generally right there that in order for debt financing to even be on the table, most of the time you do have to have some traction, some revenue you can point to, provide a tax return or two that show that for the past 2 years you've done X amount in revenue, you maybe even had a little bit of profit. You're basically trying to demonstrate to the bank or to the financial institution that you're able to repay the loan on a monthly basis. There is another option though, and that's a CDFI, so Community Development Financial Institution. And we'll have a woman named Carol O'Connell on in a couple of weeks to talk more about this, but they can provide SBA microloans up to $50,000 for businesses that don't have any traction yet. So they may have never even sold a product. There's some different underwriting criteria that the SBA requires, but there are other options available if you have not proven yet that your business is viable, so to speak. But yeah, Danny, I mean, you're spot on that the underwriting criteria has gotten a little bit harder. And in general, everybody that's willing to give money wants to see proof, wants to see proof that you've done something. You've already sold your service, sold your product, and had some success there.
Yeah, and if there's a bridge we could start to build with your last comment from debt financing, including these CDFIs, which by the way, also they'd be at a lower interest rate, right? I mean, I'm not quoting for everyone, every CDFI, but some of them are at 1%, for example, which is amazing. But the bridge between debt financing and equity investments is there are some investors who say, I'll give you debt financing, but if XYZ doesn't happen, I'd like it to convert to equity in the business. So what that really means is if at a point you can't pay me back on the debt, then I become a strategic partner in the business, an equity partner in the business. And that's dependent largely because we're starting to get to this AAA, right, business model, A+. If you're going to be a high growth investment and there's going to be, for example, 5x return, 10x return, then there could be equity partners who come in and want to make this happen with you. But it really is dependent on the business model. So for example, if you want to even open a salon, it can't just be in one local neighborhood. It has to be like a franchise or a venture business in 27 US major markets across the country with a true differentiator. I don't know. You have live music from local bands at every day. I'm just making that up on the fly, but like
You're
You know-
talking about in order to get some equity investment, right?
Yeah, and to fit usually a qualified profile of that type of equity investment. I mean, a metaphor that I constantly use, because my wife ran 400 hurdles and she just happened to be, after a lot of work, like a Coca-Cola All-American, right? So I'm sort of going up to that type of athletic profile as a metaphor, because there are 8 women that run in the Olympics in the final for the 400 hurdles, and they have handmade, spikes right on their feet to run that one event for the gold. I'm just saying, like, that's venture capital and equity investment.
Yeah.
They want you to be on that path of greatness to make that happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think, yeah, your point there is that it's really not for everybody. And there's a reason why they call those businesses unicorns a lot of times, because they really are kind of like a mythical creature. Yeah, so I mean, if we're going from debt financing, which really is available to most everybody, including, again, people that are business owners that have not really proven that they can sell their offering, equity investment might not be for everybody.
Yep.
We talked earlier about self-funding, and that potentially maybe you can get some friends and family to put in some money, and maybe you do give them a portion of the company in exchange for that. But a lot of times this equity investment really is reserved for a company that will grow pretty quickly in a short amount of time, so that the investor can get a return on their investment. That doesn't mean that you can't, in the same way that, with debt financing, you can have this SBA microloan. Kind of the equivalent to that in the investment world might be, you can sometimes find an angel investor who's not as necessarily concerned with a high return on their investment, but they believe in your mission, they believe in your vision, they believe in you, and they're willing to put in some money with, the hope that maybe one day it does come back with a high return, but they also know that they put it toward a worthy cause.
And I think, I know we want to get to the plan, because I'd love to just discuss a little bit of what developing maybe a roadmap to growth might look like. But, there's just one other it's not small in itself, but just to mention that grant funding specifically, based on everything we went through, revenue, self-funding, debt financing, equity investment, grant funding specifically is another strategy. There are qualification profiles to be that. For example, like to be a nonprofit or a 501c3 for certain grants. But, that path to money, that strategy is to look for that sponsor or that partner, right? There's many co-sponsored grant programs out there, and you could easily make an annual calendar of all these RFIs, right? Requests for information, or these first stage letters, these RFPs, requests for proposals, because all these corporate foundations, municipal governments, county governments, state governments, etc., federal, even at the federal level, there's a list of what they call IDIQ proposals, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity proposals that are out there that you can go after, and submit these proposals for a range of grants or a range of contracts. So speaking to your, this is where like Sarah and her team at Think Duchess are amazing. I'm sure similar like IDA and whatnot, they track a lot of this, this calendar as events, and you can, look them up and try to target, that path for growth.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there's probably an argument that we could put on a couple more sessions, or at least one, talking about grant funding and government contracts. But okay, so we've got maybe 7 minutes left here, maybe 10 if we're lucky. So at this point in our discussion, hopefully you have some sort of idea of what type of company you are, whether that's an independent contractor, a lifestyle business, high growth. What kind of growth plans are generally available to you. So that's the self-funding, the increased revenue, debt financing, equity investment, or even this grant funding that Danny brought up. But in order to actually execute on one of these, we think it's really important that you put together some sort of growth plan, because you can't just go out and say, I think I want to grow, I'm going to go take out a loan. but what are you going to do with that money after you take out the loan? If you don't have, a pretty rigid plan in place, I've seen this in my experience. People go out and they spend money on unnecessary things. I'm not talking about outside of the business, but they might hire X person to do Y thing that they really didn't need in the end, or they may go spend way too much on marketing when really they needed just a salesperson to go door to door. So without coming up with your growth plan and your purpose for growing in general, you can't really adopt one of these engines for growth very effectively. Let's see, we've got a hand raised here. Herman. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Is a growth plan a synonym for business plan?
I think you could look at it very similarly. A growth plan is, I wouldn't say proprietary to us here at HVCI, but it's just something that we have looked at as almost like supplemental or complementary to your business plan. So I think a business plan is a lot of times setting the foundation for what you're going out to do. A growth plan to us is, okay, we have our business plan already set. Now we're trying to accelerate growth in, one revenue line, or, I think it's a little more specific than just a general business plan. And it's going to also, it's going to list out execution steps within that plan. So it's not just necessarily describing what types of marketing you would go after if you were to get this, or would, exercise if you were going to get the business off the ground. It's like step by step, what would you do? Danny, yeah.
So to summarize, I mean, the other way you could do it, and I'm just bringing this up because, different brains approach things differently, right? So one way, Herman, to think about it is the growth plan is the first step or the first iteration of the business plan. Let's see what works, and then keep filling out the business plan as the growth happens or doesn't. And you could take an iterative approach to that. If I can make any point of that, and I've done this time and again, I do it often, even at home with my kids sometimes, I let perfection get in the way of good. So just have a good growth plan and then chip away, because perfection takes 20 years, right? To make that happen. And then, I think the growth plan, if I had to summarize it, Paul, it's revenue target, customer target, and market target, or you could say, instead of market, it could be just local, kind of target. And the reason here is you need to show the revenue growth for your own self, what kind of life you want to live and lead, and what you want to save for and spend money on, but also for the business to grow. Everything we talked about, you go to your uncle for 5K, he's going to want to know what's the revenue look like. You go with the debt financing to the bank to get that 10% on the 100K, they're going to want to know what that's like. And certainly a venture capitalist and whatnot, they need to know the revenue targets for that. I think in many ways, the way that I've developed that tactically, Paul, I think you appreciate this, is take one business unit one economic unit. So for example, a cup of coffee, at Starbucks costs $4. I'm probably rounding. It might be $4.25 or something like that. And, a million cups of coffee, that's a lot of money. So, that's your unit economic to get to your revenue targets. How many HVAC service events, Herman, do you need? Let's say that, I'm just picking a number for argument's sake. Let's say that's $200 for one HVAC service times whatever amount you think you can do over the next 9 months. That'd be pretty cool, to see that. And then customer target, the way I always think about this is, if you host a seminar with 10 students and they love it, then how can you just get another seminar with 10 students, and more 10 students, and that might be, you make apple pies. How many apple pies can you make in a week and go sell them at the farmer's market, or go to Whole Foods and pitch them that you have the best apple pie and you want it to be in their first region of a market. So, the market target is really the summation sort of what the availability of all of this is. How many customers are there within a region that you can hit that revenue? So one market might be equivalent to a certain amount of money. So for example, just because I helped a student on this a couple years ago when I was at a different institution as a visiting lecturer there, she built a social platform, a network platform for ice skating instructors. I love that as an example because it's very specific. There are only about 700 licensed or registered ice skating instructors in a certain New England area. So there you go. That's her market. 700. How many of those 700 can we get at that unit economic? And I'll tell you, Herman, for example, because I picked on you with the HVAC event, that you're either going to be happy with that number or dissatisfied with that number. And then we should have a pretty simple conversation about, okay, how do we double that? Do we need debt financing? Do I need to go to Uncle Jimmy? Do I need, and I'm trying to bring it all together, Paul, based around these three fundamentals.
Yeah. And we're about at time here, but I do think what you're touching upon is what we talked about earlier, putting the numbers together, because I do think that the numbers should drive the growth plan, whether that's your revenue targets, how many times you need to sell something in order to reach those targets. If you're approaching a new market, what's the number of people in that market that you can sell to? You really can back into a plan if you do the numbers right. I think that's our time for today. We encourage you all to join us next week to talk with Azarayas Bellamy. She's the founder of Blondery. I think it's in Peekskill. And then Pam, any closing remarks you've got for us?
First of all, thank you guys for being on the call with us today. Really appreciate your taking time away from your business. It's always difficult to carve out that time. So we compliment you guys for taking the time to work on your business. And if we want to just put, Paul, maybe in the chat, just put our email addresses if you want to reach out to any of us for follow-up.
Sure.
We will be back next week. We hope you guys will come and join us again. We're going to dive deeper into some of these different things, and we hope you'll be there. So just in the chat, do you want to just add our emails?
Yeah, I'm doing it right now. There you go.
Okay.
And then I think somebody else had a question real quick. Maria, was that you? Maybe. Okay. You're on mute, Maria.
Yeah. No, thank you. I just tried to say thank you so much. It has been helping me, this talking, and I will see you next week. Thank
great.
you.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you all. And yeah, Pam at hvci.org or Paul at hvci.org. And we can help however we can. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
See ya.